Hi, everybody. Um, I'm just going to jump in as usual and just kind of give you some thoughts about this idea of indecision and what our difficulty is as human beings around choosing. Um, I'm referencing some of the thoughts of Oliver Burkeman. It's Burkeman, and he just released a book, a new book. He wrote a book called Time Management for Mortals, which I recommend, and also just released a book. I just love his way of thinking about life, and kind of one of his core ideas that I think is really valuable is the fact that we to live well, we have to confront our finitude, right? That we have to confront the fact that we are defined by the fact of finiteness, that we can only choose one path at a time in life. And every decision we make, including the decision to not make a decision, right? Every decision we make is at the same time, that it's creating something by making a decision. We are closing off multiple other paths at the same time. And to live well, we have to take responsibility for this fact, whether or not we like it. And I think because it can be so overwhelming to recognize that there is loss on either side of any decision, that as soon as we make one choice, even if it's a very, very good choice, we're saying no to lots of other decisions. I just remember a client coming in, she was living a good life. She was happily married. Uh, Many things had gone well in her life. And she was just kind of in a midlife funk, really, and saying like, I mean, it sounds so silly in a way, but she meant it for real. She said, it's hard to get my head around the fact that I'm never going to live in London. I'm never going to raise my family in California. I'm not going to speak French and live in France. And what she was basically confronting was that I have to tolerate the fact that as I move along in life, because when we're young, we can kind of look at all the possibilities and imagine all the paths we could walk. But as we start walking a path, we are constantly closing doors. And, midlife crisis is often this kind of panic about the fact, is confronting that fact that there's all these other possibilities we're never going to live. And that's not easy. And it's not that this woman wanted to pick up and live in London, but she also was saying, like, that's never going to be my experience. And I would love to have had that experience, and, and so I think because this can be overwhelming, we do a lot of things to kind of handle this fact that don't necessarily work in our favor. So we can numb out, we can distract. One that I think clients do all the time is we tell ourselves that we have no option other than the option we have. We act like we are victims of our choices. I remember a client saying, like, I have these kids now, I have to take care of them. And I'm like, you really don't. I mean, you don't have to. I'm not recommending you leave them, but lots of mothers leave their children. Um, it's not helpful to you to pretend that you are stuck when in fact you have other options. Now, you may not have any options you like, and you may not like the consequences of making a different choice. We can't get away from that. But we are agents, we are choosers. And as much as we profess to love our agency and so on and love that concept, very few of us love it as much as we think. It's hard to tolerate the fact of ourselves, of being choosers in a life where we don't know the outcome of our decisions, where we are saying no to options at the same moment we say yes to options, and living in the reality of that. So we tell ourselves we have no other option but the one we're living, or we pray for an answer, right? We want the idea that God will tell us the most correct path. Now we can pray for clarity. I think we can pray. I mean, I'm just saying from my experience, I don't have the experience of God giving me some predetermined path that's going to keep me from suffering or living in reality. I think we can pray for courage to make decisions that are wise, that we're not approaching them from our lesser selves, right? We can pray for that clarity of judgment. But I think we still must tolerate the moral responsibility of our agency. I think our founding story of Adam and Eve is a story of agency. And it isn't like here's the good path and here's the bad path. We have two competing paths and there is loss on either side. Adam and Eve were facing a two-choice dilemma right in the beginning of life. And I think a message in it, at least one that I take from it, is that our moral development is contingent upon choosing, which I'm going to get to more in a minute. But that's the way we develop, is we make decisions and we set ourselves into reality instead of the fantasy of indecision. So this is, what we often do is that to avoid the moral responsibility of choosing a path, come to this fork in the road and we have to choose a path. So I think that a lot of times what we do is we don't know which path is going to be better. And even if we choose a path and get to the end of it, we don't know if the other path might have made us happier. There's no way to know. And even if we walk a path and it's a brilliant path and we're happily married and we like our career and we have, so many good things in our life, we can still wonder and wish we could have had aspects of the other path, right? Like this finitude thing is tough sometimes, right? And even when things are going well. And so what we often then do is say, well, I'm just going to stay here at the fork and straddle and just sort of imagine that I can get enough information that it's going to feel tolerable to make a choice or assert a choice, or that if I stay here, I haven't given up control by taking a step on a path and saying no to other things. I still have all the options. And that's a fantasy that many of us love. Um, and yet it's not true, because staying in indecision tends to make us quite miserable. That there is, and some of the questions point to this, and I can talk about this more in a minute, but there is some value in not making a decision when you're actively gathering information, when you're finding out, okay, let's say I want to launch a new business. Well, I don't want to just rush out and launch it. Jennifer said you should make decisions. I'm just going to rush headlong into a decision. Okay. No, there's something about researching and learning and getting some good input and getting enough information to be able to make a credible decision, where you are mitigating some of your risk by learning from others who've gone before you, or learning about the conditions in which you're trying to make a business, create a business. But there comes a certain point, and I think most of us know in our souls when this is, when what we're really doing is just not choosing one way or the other. I'm not going to do the business, or I'm going to do it, or I'm going to do it in a specific way, rather than looking at all the myriad possibilities of how we could do it. And that when we kind of go over that point where we're now just stalling, that's when it starts to hurt. That's when it starts to make us miserable. I've talked about this when I was dating John. Like, there was a certain amount of time of dating, getting to know someone. It all matters, right? But then there was a certain point at which I didn't want to end the relationship and I didn't want to step into the relationship. I wanted the security of the possibility without living in reality. And then it started eroding. Started eroding my sense of self, my own happiness, the happiness of the relationship. And you're like trying to hold on to something while your happiness is slipping away. And there's research that shows this right there, that, I can't remember, there's a book, I think it's called The Paradox of Choice. And he talks about, like going into, used to be you just walk into a store and buy the only pair of 501 jeans that there were, like, the pair for that year. Then he found himself going in and there was like boot cut and, straight leg and high rise and mid rise and, and stone washed and dark wash. And he's in there and he's fretting about like what pair of jeans is the best pair of jeans. He finally makes a decision. Then as he's walking out, he's like, was that the best pair? Maybe this other pair would have made me happier. And here he has all of these options, and he's never been more miserable about his jeans, where when he had only one pair, he was happy. There's also some research where they basically said, you can choose this free print of artwork. And to one group, they said, you can choose it, and then you have 2 weeks to decide if you want to come back and switch it out for something else. And then to the other half of the group, they said, choose it, and that's it. You can't come back or switch. Well, when they tested who was happier, right, at the end of the 2 weeks, including people who'd come and switched it out and got something that they supposedly liked better, the group that was happiest was, not surprisingly, given the thesis of today, the group that had no option, the group that was like, this is what you get, be happy. And they were happier with it because they didn't spin and wonder if some other print out there was going to make them just a little bit happier. And we live in a period of time now where in modern life, where, Facebook is all about, you can sort of walk in and see all the glossy lives that other people are living, or dating apps. You might meet a perfectly wonderful person, but then there's always this idea like there's all these other possibilities of people I could get to know that I could maybe have an amazing life with. And how do I actually make a decision when, there may be something a little bit better for me out there? And so, we're trying to like squeeze the most happiness into the short lives we have. And in the process, not deciding, not choosing, and in many ways making ourselves miserable and doing, first of all, we can't get away from making decisions. We are always making decisions, but often indecision, we don't recognize it as a decision and that it is impacting our lives. It is a path, and it's a costly one. And our happiness goes down the more we don't step into choices. So, deciding, the word deciding, it's got the same root as like homicide, it's cutting away. Deciding is cutting away other choices. And so, of course, we hate it. But what we, I think, have to face and confront is the fact that, first of all, this very modern idea that we should get the most out of life, that we, this fear of missing out, is that paradoxically, we end up missing out because we don't choose one person, choose one life, and claim it fully. And so Oliver Burkeman talks about this as the joy of missing out, that in fact, to live in reality makes us happier. To choose one imperfect person and really invest your life with that person without living always in the fantasy of the other possibility that hangs out there, that you're actually happier because you can now live in the finiteness of that decision. And finitude, as much as we may hate it, right? It in fact gives our lives meaning. That if every day were Groundhog Day and we just could live it on repeat, that, in some ways, why do anything? Nothing, everything kind of stops mattering in the same way because you can always do it tomorrow and nothing really matters because you don't have to really claim the preciousness of now by making a choice into reality and living in it well. And so finitude pressures us against the fantasy of always having options. And it's pushing us to kind of claim, to use our agency to forge a life, to create, to be something in the precious and short time that we have. But it requires tolerating loss at the same time, tolerating grief, tolerating uncertainty, tolerating not knowing if maybe the other path might have made us a little bit happier. And pushing ourselves to make choices, right? Practicing making choices that close down our options and force us to live in the present. When I was in this straddling position in my relationship with John, I could like think about all the other possible relationships I could have, the other people I could meet, the other possible lives I could live. And yet I never had to learn to love or care or create something because I could just kind of hold on to all these fantastical possibilities that didn't ask anything of me and that didn't kind of push me to live in reality. And so that's a very tempting thing to do as human beings. So let me just ask before I kind of go into the questions, any comments or questions about this, about the challenge of agency and choosing?
Well, Blaine was telling me about a podcast he listened to on Faith Matters recently, that it was kind of a thing, especially for people my age, to not close any doors, to like leave
Yeah.
every possibility open. And I think that has
Yeah.
caused us to be two of us married together that are afraid to close any doors. Every decision is, I don't know. And then I beat myself up for every decision we do
Yeah.
make.
Well, then that's the other thing, is that you can then live in the regret of I should have made that decision, or what. You can also be in the fantasy that had I done it, had I not done that, everything would have been great, which is also a kind of fantasy. But I think the other piece in that is like not deciding is still a path.
Yeah.
We want the idea that like, just waiting to make a decision is keeping me from the risk, when I would say it's one of the riskiest ways to live, because then we always have this regret, this sense that our fear ran us, not our courage. And again, when we make decisions, we feel better. I have a son who tends to be anxious, who tends to hold back. And he called me once when he was like having a hard time wanting to start a paper that he just didn't, just like couldn't get the motivation. And so I said something like, well, think about what it is that, like, why you want to write this paper. What's the kind of end game for you? What's the long goal? Why would you be doing it? And he just said, that actually doesn't help me to think like that. He's like, what actually helps me the most is the fact to remember that when I do it, I feel better. If I just start writing something, if I just start committing to something, then I start to feel better. And I think that's very true. It's counterintuitive for us to limit our choices, but usually, see, then we don't have to live in all the possibilities. And never are people more miserable that are in a marriage but not in the marriage. In the marriage but in love with somebody else, or considering the possibility of another life, or another, and not really choosing in or really choosing out.
Mm.
And so making choices is hard because we have to live in the consequences of them. And again, we often don't have the options that we want. Usually we want an option that doesn't require loss, that doesn't require risk, that doesn't require uncertainty. We want, I hear people talk about, I'm waiting for the Lord to give me, a sign or a signal or whatever. And I think that looks like faith, but it's really more about fear and an intolerance of living life on life's terms. So let me go to some of the questions. One second.
It was kind of, when I started working for you, that was one thing. I mean, this isn't about relationships, but I was so hesitant to ever like start a project or try something, or I don't know, make some sort of business decision. And you were like, hey, I want to do a podcast that's a subscription based podcast. And I'm like, okay, I'll figure it out. And you didn't have a perfect plan. You didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to do it. And yet there I was doing it when I had other ideas in my life that it was like, well, I don't really know how to do it and I'm going to mess it up and all that. And we don't do Room for Two the same way that we did when we first started. There were better ways, but like we
Right.
forced, like I just watch you do that in your business, and it's something I'm able to do when I'm working for you, but in my own life, it's too scary, or I get stuck in the thinking it through and making sure I do it perfectly, but nothing ever gets done when I
Well,
do
it
that.
is a good example in many ways, because like your ability to get in there and just start learning and figuring out what our options were and how we might put it together and so on, um, was, how to say it, you had no idea how to do a podcast. I had no idea how to do it, just getting in there and trying things and doing it and figuring it out and creating something. And so it's like, look, Christy was actually able to go and put that together. I was able to do it. But I think you're also making a really important point that if I could sort of put the responsibility away from myself, it freed me up. Where if it was sitting on me alone, I think you're saying is that in another context, it would be hard it was hard to do it.
Right.
And
Right.
yeah, and I just think it's difficult for us to bear the weight of the uncertainty of
Right.
the, like maybe this go wrong. Who am I to be doing a podcast? Who am I to think I could or should do that? Yeah, that a lot of times the doubt just comes in and kind of strips us of the ability to create something when in another context we have the full capacity to do it, but we're just afraid of that moral weight or that risk. So, okay, so let me see what this person says. This is, how long do you give yourself to make the choice when one option is divorce? I want to be fair to my spouse and not keep them locked in a relationship I'm not sure about. I also want to be certain when ending an eternal marriage because that feels very significant. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a good answer to this because what I don't know is what your situation is and what you have dealt with in your life and in yourself, and what is in fact on the line. I think that what I'm always helping people with is you want to get more truth into the marriage about you, about your partner, about who you are as a couple. Because if there's any chance for that marriage to really grow, it usually needs more truth and responsibility in it, including you, the one who's thinking of leaving it. And some people want the idea that they're the victim in their marriage, that they've done everything, and they live in the resentment of what they haven't gotten, but they don't see their own difficulty with loving, their own difficulty with giving. And, you know, they want the idea that they're a victim to be able to propel them into the exit door, that they can kind of use this idea that, I'm a victim, therefore I'm entitled to go. So there's those situations, and but then there are people where I, see that one's partner is taking advantage, is not going to address anything, is not going to change anything, is not going to face anything. And even if their spouse is really owning their part of things, really trying to do differently, is invested, they're partnered with someone who's not really going to take on the moral responsibility of who they are in the marriage and how they impact their spouse. And that person, that the one who's married to the one who won't take responsibility, is very often up against a very challenging decision. Because if it's just our personal happiness and that's the only factor, maybe then it's an obvious choice to leave. But it seldom is just our personal happiness. It's often also the impact on our children, the good that is in the marriage, the things that you have in fact created together, the uncertainty of what it means to leave. Will you in fact find something better, right? And those are all very, very hard questions. I think anyone who's in any simple-minded idea that you always should stay no matter what, or that you always should leave because you're entitled to your happiness, I think in both cases is simple-minded, because the morality of those decisions is complex. And it points very much to the question of, what decision can I tolerate choosing? Which path can I take the full responsibility for claiming? And that's the real question. And I think, I worked with somebody who had lots of good reasons for wanting to leave her marriage, including a spouse that wasn't interested in dealing with himself, that wasn't interested in participating in in coaching with me. And so she asked him to move out. And she could feel all these people are judging me and people think I'm making the wrong decision. And I said, people people are going to judge it. That, it's just comes with the turf, that people are going to have opinions about that. The question is, can you live with the choice? And as she kept sort of taking that question onto herself, she got to a point, I was just working with her individually because he wasn't interested. Or he hadn't been at the point before she asked him to move out anyway. And she finally said, I'm not ready yet to take this on. I can't live with it yet because I'm not yet clear that I did my part. And I need to know that I've done my part before I can live with the effect on my kids, my own, sense of responsibility for breaking up a family. In her case, she ended up, asking him to move back in. He was now very willing to work because I think he really saw the end and he didn't want it to end. And they made a lot of progress and wrote me later and thanked me because they just were really grateful for what they were able to change. But this came out of her making a decision out of her integrity that she could live with. I've worked with other people where out of integrity are choosing to stay for a period of time, really bringing their best, and then coming to a point where they know, and it's not like they're gleeful or they have another relationship waiting in the wings or anything like that. They're actually rather heartbroken, but they know, like, I can't any longer truly choose this and hold my self-respect intact. I can't do it. One case I have in mind, the kids had grown. I'm just going to mask the gender of the person. The person was just clear that they could no longer in good faith stay. And it was painful, but it really was coming from something kind of that the person knew they could continue to back up. So I don't know, I can't tell people now is the time or it is not the time because it's something internal. It's like, what's the path I can live? And there's some people that stay in difficult marriages. Now, a bad way to do that is to stay and resent it at every step and to feel like you're the victim and, you would be so happy except for the lame person you're married to because somebody else would just love you so well. I mean, we love those ideas, but it's an indulgent way to do it. And it's not really choosing. It's being a victim while being too cowardly to choose in or choose out. And so if you're going to choose in, then choose it and bring your best self there and bring your honest self there. And really choose to love that other person, flawed as they are, flawed as you are, and bring your best to that partnership, or say I can't do it and choose out of it. And the other thing is that as you choose, you get clearer. When you're back in the fantasy, you think. So I remember I was working with a therapist at the time that I was dating John. And the reason I even went into therapy was because I was just so miserable. Like I felt so stuck and I couldn't end and I couldn't move forward. And so she worked with me through a lot of what my ambivalences were, what my fears were of marriage, talked a lot through kind of gender roles in church. She was not LDS. And then I remember at a certain point, she said to me, you can't know anything more about this relationship from the position that you're in. You've gotten all the information you can get, and you just are too cowardly. She said it probably a little nicer than that, but to really choose one way or the other. And the only way you're going to know is by either choosing in 2 feet or out 2 feet. She's like, in my world, what choosing in would be you move in together. Given who you are, that probably means you need to get engaged. And I'm like, get engaged? Like, no, you're kidding me. Like, and she's like, well, then end it and truly end it and let this person go, right? And I'm like, no, I can't do that. Are you kidding me? But she was saying, look, you got to move, you got to behave differently if you're going to know anything else. And so I was like, okay, the one that my soul wants, but I'm terrified of. So I want to step in. I want to see what's possible if I just stop straddling and I stop living in all the ambivalence. And I remember her saying to me, if you step in, okay, and you get engaged, things are either going to get clearer for you if you really step in. You don't continue to do like psychological straddling while saying you really step in. You're either going to be more confident as you move forward to getting married, or it's going to fall apart and you're going to know that it's the wrong path. But you got to behave differently. And it was terrifying for me, but what happened is as I stepped in, things got clearer, things got better, things got more joyful, honestly. I like felt relief, like tremendous relief, and I could see all the good that I could have in my life. But in part because I was actually operating from a clear position. I was stepping in, I was choosing it, I was bringing my whole self, and it changed what was possible. So, but there's also people that would step in and say, I now know that I cannot do this, that this is the wrong decision for me. That's why people have engagements. Okay. So, yeah, this is just kind of the same idea. But is it possible to not be straddling and stay in a sexless and loveless marriage? Yes, it is possible. When that's not what you want, well, right. Okay. Let me just finish the question. Is staying because of your kids straddling? Not necessarily. Is there anything about straddling that is okay, or is it always bad? It's okay when it's about getting more information, but then it erodes. But staying in a marriage, right, because of your kids isn't necessarily straddling. That can be, I'm choosing this path. I've told this story before, but this client that said, listen, I understand you don't want this to be a sexual marriage. I'm going to stop trying to make it one. I'm going to stay here and raise the kids with you. At the end, I'm probably choose differently, but let's acknowledge it for what it is and what it isn't. But I'm going to bring my best and co-parent with you and be your friend, but let's let go of this other possibility. Let's not pretend it exists when it doesn't. That to me is an integrity-based decision. He knew he did not want to end the marriage. He did want to stop trying to turn it into something that his wife didn't want it to be. And he didn't want the way that it made them each feel bad, right? That she felt put upon and he felt tolerated. And so he said, let's acknowledge what it is and what it isn't. And I he didn't say out of integrity, but it was out of integrity. He's like, but I choose to stay here and to raise these kids and be a good father and a good co-parent with you. Okay. What are some suggestions on knowing when you've done all you can do and deciding to divorce after 25 plus years of marriage? Suggestions on deciding between two sucky choices. Yeah, I think, is, is my staying, so let me see, what's the best way to make it clear and concise? Am I staying out of fear or out of a sense of moral responsibility? When I judge myself, what is it that I don't respect in my decision to stay? What is it that I wouldn't respect in the decision to go? What is the part of me that's indulgent in staying here? What's the part of me that's indulgent in going? You want to get at where's my lesser self operating? What choice would I really respect in me, right? And how would I do this if I did it in a way that I felt was fair and decent in the moral fabric of my life? A lot of times, the way we are in a marriage is in a resentful quietness, not in an honest engagement with the partner that we resent, right? And and so sometimes just the exit door feels like the way out of that level of intimacy and exposure and conflict and reality. And you want to make sure that you've really dealt with the marriage, because even if it ultimately results in you choosing to leave it, you want the psychological muscles of having dealt honestly with another person and with yourself, of having dealt fairly with the other person and yourself. Because if you're going to choose better, you need the capacity that exiting a marriage out of your integrity requires. You need that skill set. You need it to not go and repeat it. right? Because if you, let's say you're somebody who caretakes a needy person, and that needy person is like, this is a good deal for me, I'm just going to be needy and never choose and just be kind of in a more childlike position in the marriage. Well, the one who feels like they need to be needed all the time, but resents that this hasn't translated into passion for them or being chosen or being cared about, is very, very likely to leave out of resentment and go find another needy person that at first is going to think they're great and at first is going to have a lot of passion, but can very easily then turn back into, take care of me, shield me from having to feel insecure or uncertain. I don't want to have to actually choose someone. I want to need someone. So you see, we can easily keep our immaturities, not deal with our immaturities. And that's the part you want to be careful about. So when you're bringing your honest self, you're going to get more of the clarity you need, is if this is wrong to continue. And there may be a point at which it's not right to leave, and there may be a point at which it's more right to leave, right? But you want it to be driven by your most honest self, and and operating from a place that you can back up within yourself years to come. Okay, this person says, how do I stop doing this? It's literally making me feel crazy. I'm imagining straddling. How do I know when I'm overthinking or actually coming up against something in the relationship I need to address? This person asked a similar question. Let me just read both. I know that I'm a straddler and very indecisive, especially when it comes to choosing my marriage, right? Can I allow myself to focus on what my higher self wants without my regressive brain interfering and bombarding me with indecision? How can I calm myself so that the choice is clear and I don't get overwhelmed with the confusion or perceived safety of not making a decision? Yeah, well, it would, because I don't have the specifics, it's a little bit hard to know how to answer it, but I think it's the reminder that, first of all, I think a lot of us think if I'm going to choose or step in, like that makes it my last decision. And it isn't. I can remember, even on the night before my wedding, just reminding myself that I was fully choosing. I felt very good about the choice. But I reminded myself that if it ever became wrong to be in with 2 feet, if John were to cheat on me or do something that would make it no longer the most moral right thing to do, then I reserved the right to leave. Meaning I wasn't going to sacrifice my well-being for a decision made in the present. I wouldn't, if at some point it was no longer right, that I would continue to choose what was right, best, what was meet, to use the scriptural reference. And so one way to do that is to say, like, making a decision, first of all, straddling is a decision, and it's eroding my well-being and my marriage. It's a fantasy that is giving me power. It's actually taking it from me. And what decision do I actually think is best, even though it has risks? And as I make it, I'm going to have more clarity, not less, more capacity, not less. To step into reality is to create. It is to choose, is to forge. And so sitting back here is to be stalling on that process. To step in is to make something happen. And now I'm standing in a different position and can see more clearly from that new position. And if I decide from that new position that another decision makes sense, I reserve the right to make it. So it's just reminding yourself that, this is not giving me the superpower I think it is. And it's only about my fear. And the only way that I get better at not being so afraid of life is stepping into the fear and choosing anyway. Choosing makes you more powerful. It does. And it gives you more information. And as soon as it's past collecting information you need to choose wisely, it's no longer good for you. I would really recommend Oliver Berkman's writing on this for the people writing those two questions. Christy, are there questions that have come in?
Any tips on making decisions when the gut says one thing, anxious or not right, and the head logically says another? On paper, it looks good.
Okay, is it good question. So what the gut meaning, is the gut coming from fear, or do you think it's coming from an intuition that's hard to account for logically? Does that person know? Like, is it just like my fears taking over? Or do I actually think, for example, there may be somebody on paper looks like a great choice, but there's something about it that I can't, that feels wrong to me, right? Then I would say, trust your gut. If it's that you're always in this kind of skepticism and always looking for what could go wrong, and you're calling that your gut, then you may not want to trust it as much, because it's more that you're leading with critique as a way to not take the risk of choosing something. So what's informing the gut? That's the question. Okay, good. So let's see. Somebody says, what does it look like to choose your spouse when you are in the limbo of considering leaving? Like, to know you did everything you could by actually going all in, but also knowing that you may choose to leave eventually and that you really aren't okay with some ways your partner is showing up. I'm laughing because I guess I'm asking how to not straddle while continuing to straddle, but I can't figure out a better way to ask this. Okay, no, it's a good question. Well, how to say it? I think a lot of times we think if I'm choosing, it means that I just have to kind of go blind to the things that are a problem, and I just have to deal with them. And I actually don't think that's the right way to think about it, because I'm just refining a story in one of the chapters of the book, and there's this part where in this story, the wife starts to speak more honestly about her experience of the sexual relationship, which is a little bit disorienting for the husband, because he thinks of himself as much more generous than how she's experiencing him. And, he experiences it as a little bit jarring, but also he respects it. He respects that she's being honest. And what it also says to him is that she's actually invested in this marriage, that she is not saying it to justify why she doesn't want to have sex. She's saying it because she actually wants the sexual relationship to be better. And so if we're choosing into a marriage, it doesn't mean we are no longer talking about things that are a problem, but we're talking about them in a different way. Not like, this is why I don't choose you, this is why I lean out, is because you're all these annoying things. You're actually saying, I want a good marriage with you. I want to be happy. This is something that is hard for me. This is something that, because I love you and I choose you, I want for us to deal with, because I want us to be better friends. And I recognize that it's easy for you to do that because I can do this other piece, and I know that I do that. And I want there to be a chance for us, and I want us to work on it. Now, if your partner's like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, I don't do that, I don't care, if you have somebody who just isn't going to deal, then you have to recognize, what I'm actually choosing is to live in the marriage as it is. And can I choose that amongst my options? But a lot of times when we say we're choosing it, we're like choosing to step in a more honest way. We're choosing to collaborate. We're choosing to stop being a victim of everything, and to bring more honesty and investment in creating something qualitatively better. Okay, any last comments or thoughts before I jump off? What are your last thoughts, Christy? And then
Oh my gosh, nobody wants to hear
I know how you love talking on microphone. You love it.
Yeah, it's my favorite. Yeah, you were supposed to read the quote from David White, remember? I sent it to you.
Did you send it to me?
I did. That's my closing thought.
Thank you, Chrissy. This is actually the right thing to read. So this is David White, Whyte, for those of you who don't know him. The only choice we have as we mature is how we inhabit our vulnerability, how we become larger and more courageous and more compassionate through our intimacy with disappearance. Our choice is to inhabit vulnerability as generous citizens of loss, robustly and fully, or conversely as misers and complainers, reluctant and fearful, always at the gates of existence, but never bravely and completely attempting to enter, never wanting to risk ourselves, never walking fully through the door. Yeah, he's brilliant.
I think when I read that, it just like I could all of a sudden see my whole life and how I had lived in like this clenched up position, just so afraid of losing things, just so of trying to control what can't be controlled. And so I loved that at the end there, he wraps it into straddling. You're just standing at the door, never actually living because you're so afraid of what you might.
Exactly. And he says our choice is to inhabit vulnerability as generous citizens of loss, robustly and fully, or conversely, as misers and complainers, reluctant and fearful, always at the gates of existence, but never bravely and completely attempting to enter, never wanting to risk ourselves, never walking fully through the door. Yeah, that exactly. It's kind of going back to this kind of confronting our finitude, that life is about uncertainty and loss and vulnerability. And how am I going to relate to that? Am I going to resent it and feel like a victim of it? Or am I going to embrace the privilege that I have to even have today to live? The privilege of being in relationship with other people that care about me, however imperfectly, that I have a privilege that so many others don't have, to be alive today. And how am I going to expend that moment? I can be in the entitlement that I should be able to do everything, and that I resent that I don't have a relationship that's all these other things for me. Or I can step into this reality and this moment and this relationship and embrace this life and live it with more generosity, with more courage, with more love, and actually transform it and make it better. So yeah, so I think that's our two choice dilemma. Do I step in and bring my best self here, or do I resent the terms on which I have to live? And yeah, I just think we find so much more beauty by living in it courageously. Sometimes courage means leaving a bad relationship. Sometimes it means stepping more lovingly, more courageously, more honestly into it. But never making that choice out of our entitlement, out of our fantasy that we're owed something, or that there's something great for us that exists outside of the hard work of reality, and daring to live life on life's terms. That's where we find the most strength and the most joy. Okay, everybody, thanks so much. And if you have thoughts about what you would like a Facebook Live to be about in the future, heartbreak, the one Christy brought up, or anything.
Christy's really going through some stuff, you guys.
Yeah, exactly. Then just shout it out, let Christy know, and we can always consider those
Truly, we would love
possibilities.
to. You're always welcome to message me ideas for Facebook Lives. Love to.
Yeah, exactly.
And Jennifer, you should go, but I'll tell them, why we chose this topic is because you're introducing a few new losing strategies into the update.
Oh, yeah,
of course.
Exactly. So in the original Strengthening Your Relationship course, what did I have? 7 losing strategies, I think. 5 come from Terry Reel's work, 2 I added, and now we have 10 losing strategies.
And 3 have come from working with Christy.
Yeah, I started working with Christy. I'm like, oh my gosh, we haven't even accounted for this one. Yeah. So, and in truth, we could easily come up with 15, but we thought, we got to keep it. 10's a good number. So,
Yeah, we'll save some for the next update. But no. And if anyone else has any other questions, let me know. We right now have a $200 discount code on the Art of Desire retreat that's coming up. We also, which is the end of September, all that good stuff. So she's the talker, you guys. I'm the writer, so she is gone, and I don't see any other questions. So thank you for coming, everybody, and we'll see you. Oh, any info on upgrade price if you've purchased, like if you purchased the course previously, if you bought within the 12 months before the update goes live, which will be in about 2 weeks, it's an automatic upgrade. Then everyone else, I think if you bought more than 12 months ago, I think it's going to be $147. Room for Two sale. Mark, I'm saving that for Halloween because that's my good sales. Room for Two sales kind of pop up every now and again. I don't have one on the docket. I'm almost certain we would have one for Halloween because she liked my ads for that one. Who was the author of that quote? His name is David White. He's incredible. So you can read his work. He wrote a book called Consolations, The Solace and Meaning of Everyday Words. And they're all just short but beautiful, like Heartbreak is one. The one that she shared was from the consolation Vulnerability. There's one on friendship. I love them all. You can get them in a book, but you can also listen to him read them on the Waking Up app from Sam Harris. If you want to keep the chat going, I can give you a free 30-day trial. But you can also just Google it. You can sometimes find him reading his poems. David, Whyte. Sam Harris does a lot of work with him in the Waking Up app. And it's all really, really good. He's Jennifer in poet form. That's my best way to describe it. And he has a very easy to listen to voice. So any other questions? No? Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.